Chapter 1. The Stranger at the Saloon. The saloon doors groaned on their hinges as he stepped inside, the desert dusk painting the horizon behind him in streaks of crimson and gold. Dust clung to his boots and hat, and every spur chime echoed against the wooden floorboards. The chatter dulled for a moment, as if the whole room needed to measure the man who had just ridden down from the mountains. He carried the wilderness with him, his beard rough, his coat smelling of pine and smoke, his eyes weathered by solitude. A man who spoke little and drank even less. He moved to the counter, ordered a whiskey in a low voice, and let the room settle back into its rhythm of cards, laughter, and the piano's weary tune. The bartender slid the glass his way, but before his hand reached it, the saloon doors swung open again. Every head turned. A woman stepped in, sunlight spilling around her like she carried the sunset itself inside. She wore a pale dress, travel-worn yet delicate, and a veil draped back over her dark hair. On her finger gleamed a gold ring, the mark of a bride. Her presence silenced the room sharper than any gunshot. Her gaze swept past the cowhands, the gamblers, the outlaws nursing their beer, and then her eyes fixed on him. He froze, the glass still in his hand, his heart thudding against ribs that had weathered storms and winters without trembling. She walked toward him, her steps light but steady on the old planks, every man in the room watching as though she were crossing a stage. When she stopped before him, he finally saw the curve of her mouth, soft, almost trembling, as if she carried words too heavy to keep inside. "Do you recognize me, mountain man?" Her voice, clear yet hushed, cut through the smoke and fiddle music. She tilted her head, a wistful sadness in her smile. "I was your childhood neighbor." The whiskey burned his throat, though he hadn't touched it. Images stirred, of a little girl barefoot by the creek, her laughter ringing through the summer grass, her hair tangled with wildflowers. But that was a lifetime ago, buried beneath years of wilderness and silence. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His fingers curled against the bar, knuckles whitening as if he needed to hold on to something solid in the shifting storm of memory. The saloon had gone dead quiet. Even the piano man's hands hovered above the keys. At last, he managed a hoarse whisper, almost to himself. "Clara?" Her eyes glistened, and she nodded once, slow and certain. The sound of distant coyotes drifted into the swinging doors, and the mountain man felt the weight of the years settle on him like dust. A past he thought gone had just walked into the saloon, wearing a wedding ring, and carrying a secret he could already feel would break him or save him. Chapter 2. Ghosts of the Past. The mountain man, Elias, as some remembered him, sat across from her at a corner table where the shadows of the lanterns kept their meeting half hidden. The saloon had resumed its noise, but he felt every pair of eyes flicking their way, curious as coyotes circling a campfire. Clara lowered her veil, revealing a face that was both familiar and strange. Her features had sharpened with womanhood, yet in the curve of her cheek and the softness of her eyes, he could still see the barefoot girl who once dared him to climb higher, to run faster, to never be afraid. "You vanished," he said finally, his voice gravelly from disuse. "One summer you were there, and the next gone." She traced a finger along the rim of her glass, the lamplight catching on the gold of her wedding band. "Father sold the land. We moved east. I was 16. I thought—" She hesitated, biting back words. "I thought you'd come after me." Elias shifted, his jaw tightening. He remembered that summer, the sickness that had taken his mother, the years spent burying himself in the mountains to escape grief. He'd been a boy drowning in silence, too lost to chase anyone. "I should have," he admitted, his hand clenching on the table. "I wanted to. But life—" He looked away, ashamed, as if the years had branded him a coward. Clara reached out, her hand hovering close to his, though not touching. "I never forgot you. I carried those summers with me like a secret. Every creek, every oak tree, every promise you whispered by the fence. Her voice cracked on the last word. The piano struck a sour note, jarring him back. He studied her closely now. The gown too fine for this dusty town, the guarded way she sat, and the weight of that ring gleaming like a shackle. Your husband, Elias said slowly, each syllable heavy. Who is he? She looked down, her lips pressed tight. The pause was long enough to make the lantern flame waver in the draft. Then she answered, James Carver. He owns half the cattle between here and the Rio Grande. Elias's chest tightened. He knew the name. Everyone did. Carver was a rancher with more guns than mercy. A man whose men left trails of bruises and broken fences wherever they rode. Her eyes met his again, raw and vulnerable. I didn't choose him. My father did. For land, for money. I gave my vows, but my heart... She trailed off, shaking her head. My heart stayed here, buried with the boy I thought I'd lost. Elias felt the whiskey burn down his throat, though he hadn't lifted the glass. Outside, the wind carried the lonely call of a coyote, and inside, the past pressed against the present until he could barely breathe. He should have stood, walked out, and never looked back. But Clara's gaze held him, fragile and fierce all at once, and he knew the wilderness inside him would never again be enough. Chapter 3, Shackles of Duty. The night air clung heavy to the saloon, thick with cigar smoke and whispers that spread faster than prairie fire. Elias and Clara sat close in the corner, yet the distance between them felt like a canyon carved by years, duty, and danger. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her veil, her eyes flicking often toward the door as though she expected the devil himself to walk through. I shouldn't be here, Clara murmured, her voice barely rising above the piano's weary tune. If James's men saw me speaking to you... She trailed off, her throat tightening. Elias leaned in, his rough palms resting on the table. Then why did you come, Clara? Why now? Her eyes glistened in the lantern glow. She lowered her voice to a whisper that trembled with shame and courage alike. Because I couldn't keep silent anymore. She swallowed, looking down her hands. He treats me like property, like a piece of land he bought and branded. And no matter how I smile in public, at home I live in fear. Elias's jaw flexed, his hand curling into a fist against the wood. He had faced wolves in the mountains, bandits on the trail, and winters that starved him near to death. None of it twisted his gut like hearing her speak of bruises she could not name. Clara, his voice cracked, low and dangerous. If he lays a hand on you again... Don't, she cut in quickly, her fingers brushing his as though to keep him from rising, from doing something reckless. You can't fight him. He owns men, guns, lawmen. The whole town whispers, but no one dares stand against him. Elias heard it, and so did Clara. Her face paled, but her spine straightened. She pulled her hand back, draping her veil once more as though to shield herself from the weight of every watchful eye. I should go, she whispered, rising. The scrape of her chair drew more attention, the clink of her wedding band against the glass, like a cruel reminder. Elias, you were the only place I ever felt safe. Don't let them take that memory from me. And with that, she turned, her skirts brushing the dusty floor, as she hurried toward the swinging doors. Elias remained seated, his pulse hammering, his body torn between restraint and rage. He knew one truth now. If Carver had Clara shackled by duty, then Elias was already shackled by love, and the chains were pulling tight. Chapter 4, Gunpowder at Sunset. The evening sun bled red across the horizon, its glow filtering through the warped glass windows of the saloon. Elias sat at the bar, his whiskey untouched, replaying every word Clara had spoken. Outside, boots crunched on gravel, Horses snorted, and a tension thicker than smoke crept into the air. Then the saloon doors burst open with a crash that silenced the piano mid-note. James Carver strode in, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his black coat brushing the dust from the threshold. Behind him came two hired guns, eyes sharp, hands resting too casually on the butts of their revolvers. Carver's face was sunburned and cruel, his mustache twisted like a sneer carved permanent. His gaze swept the room until it locked on Elias. "So," Carver drawled, his voice booming like a whip crack, "it's you? The hermit who crawled down from the hills to sip whiskey in my town." His eyes narrowed, the smirk twisting crueler, "And to sit with my wife." The whispers turned to silence. Elias rose slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the bar. His hand hovered near his holster, though his eyes never left Carver's. "Your wife came here of her own will," Elias said, calm but edged with steel. Carver's laugh was cold, rattling like spurs on stone. He stepped closer, the boards creaking beneath his boots. "My wife goes nowhere without my say-so. And if she does, well, I have a way of reminding her who she belongs to." A chair scraped violently against the floor. Elias had moved, quicker than anyone expected, closing the distance until he stood chest to chest with Carver. Their stares clashed like steel on flint. "You lay a hand on her again," Elias growled, low enough that only Carver could hear, "and you'll answer to me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A gambler dropped his cards. The bartender ducked behind the counter. The hired gun stepped forward, hands twitching toward their weapons. Carver sneered. "You think you can take me? One man against my whole spread." He shoved Elias back hard, and the room erupted into motion. A fist flew, Elias's, crashing into Carver's jaw, sending him stumbling into a table that splintered under his weight. Bottles shattered, men shouted, and the piano man scrambled away as the saloon erupted in chaos. One of Carver's men drew, but Elias spun, kicking the gun from his hand before the shot could fire. The weapon clattered across the floorboards. Another swung a chair at Elias's back, but he ducked, grabbing the man's arm and slamming him into a post with a sickening crack. Through it all, Clara's voice pierced the din. She had entered behind her husband, and now she stood frozen near the door, her veil torn, her eyes wide with terror. "Elias!" she cried, her voice breaking. The sound snapped him out of the fury. He turned, chest heaving, sweat and blood mingling on his brow. Across the wreckage, Carver rose again, gun drawn, eyes blazing with murder. The room held its breath. Outside, the last rays of sunset lit the dust swirling through the air like smoke. And in that silence, Elias realized the line had been crossed. There was no going back. Chapter 5. Flight across the plains. The gunshot never came. Elias's hand was faster than thought, knocking Carver's revolver aside, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the wall. In the chaos that followed, the shouting, the smashing, the scrambling, Elias grabbed Clara by the wrist. "Come on," he growled, pulling her through the haze of gun smoke. She stumbled after him, skirts tangling around her boots, her breath quick and shallow. Behind them, Carver bellowed curses, his men shouting for blood. The saloon doors flew wide as Elias shoved through, the last of the sunset casting the street in blood-red fire. 2 horses were tied at the post. Elias untied his gray stallion in a swift motion and lifted Clara into the saddle before swinging up behind her. Her gasp caught in her throat as his arm wrapped firm around her waist. "Hold tight," he said, and with a kick, the stallion bolted into the open plain. Gunfire cracked behind them, bullets snapping at the dirt. Clara ducked against him, her veil tearing loose to fly into the wind like a ghost. The stallion thundered forward, hooves striking sparks against the hard pan before they plunged into the open wilderness. The night swallowed them whole. Stars blinked awake across the sky. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind carried the chill of the desert. Elias didn't slow until the town lights were no more than fading sparks on the horizon. Clara's breathing steadied, though she still clutched his arm as though it were the only anchor she had left in the world. "You shouldn't have done this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He'll never stop coming. You've painted a target on your back." Elias's jaw set, eyes scanning the dark horizon for riders. "He was already hurting you. I couldn't stand by." Her silence said more than words. The small shudder that went through her body, the way she leaned back against him as though, for the first time in years, she could finally breathe. They reached the cover of a dry canyon, its walls rising around them like sentinels. Elias dismounted and helped her down, his rough hands careful on her arms. He led the stallion into the shadow of a boulder, tying him off, then turned to her. Clara's hair tumbled loose from its pins, her face pale but luminous in the starlight. For a moment neither spoke. The night was vast around them, filled with the song of crickets and the rustle of sage. Finally, Clara broke the silence, her voice raw with something between sorrow and longing. "All these years, I prayed I'd see you again, but I never imagined it would be like this, running for our lives." Elias stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "When I was a boy, I let you slip away once. I won't make that mistake again." Her breath hitched, and for the first time since stepping into that saloon, Clara smiled. It was small, fragile, but it held the promise of something stronger than fear, something worth fighting for. Above them, the stars burned bright, while somewhere far across the plains, Carver's riders prepared to hunt. Chapter 6. A Promise Kept. Dawn crept slow and cold across the plains, the sky painted in streaks of pale gold and bruised violet. Elias saddled his stallion with steady hands, though his shoulders carried the weight of what was coming. Clara sat nearby, wrapped in his coat, her eyes following every movement with a mix of fear and faith. "They'll find us," she said softly. Her voice trembled, though she tried to hide it. "James won't rest until he drags me back." Elias tightened the cinch strap and turned to her. His face was hard, but his eyes held that quiet, unyielding steadiness she remembered from childhood. "Then let him come. I'll end this today." She rose, crossing the short distance between them, her bare feet crunching on the gravel of the canyon floor. Elias, her hand touched his arm, gentle, pleading. "If he kills you, I'll have lost you twice in one lifetime. I can't." He cupped her face in his rough palms, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Clara, when we were children, I promised to keep you safe. I broke that once. I won't again. Not now. Not ever." Her breath caught, tears threatening. But before she could answer, the sound of hooves echoed down the canyon like thunder rolling closer. Dust rose at the mouth of the ravine. Carver and his men. Elias pushed Clara gently behind the rocks. "Stay low." Carver's voice rang out, venom laced with triumph. "Elias, you think you can steal my wife and live to tell the tale? Come out and die like a man." Elias stepped into the open, the morning sun at his back. His revolver gleamed at his side, his silhouette cut against the golden light. "She was never yours, Carver. You bought her like cattle, but her heart ain't for sale." Carver snarled, spurring his horse forward. He dismounted in a spray of dust, gun drawn. His men lingered behind, their eyes uncertain, but none dared move before their master. The two men faced each other, 10 paces apart. The world held its breath. Even the wind seemed to stop. Carver sneered. "You're a dead man." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Maybe, but if I fall, I'll fall standing between you and her." The draw came fast as lightning. 2 flashes of steel, 2 gunshots cracking in the still air. Smoke curled between them. Carver staggered, clutching his chest, blood blooming across his fine coat. His revolver slipped from his grip, clattering uselessly to the dirt. With a final, disbelieving gasp, he crumpled to the ground. Silence. Then the coyotes howled in the distance, carrying the news of death across the plains. Elias lowered his weapon, his breath heavy, his body trembling not with fear, but with the release of it all. Clara ran to him, her hands pressed into his chest as if to make sure he still stood. "You kept your promise," she whispered, her tears falling freely now. He drew her into his arms, holding her close against the rising sun. "From this day on," he said, voice rough but steady, "you'll never walk alone again." Together, they mounted his stallion, leaving the canyon and the pass behind. As the sun climbed higher, Elias glanced at Clara, her hair shining in the golden light, her smile finally free. The mountains and plains stretched endless before them, a wild land filled with danger and promise. But for the first time, Elias knew he wasn't wandering anymore. He had found his home beside her. The sun sank low, spilling molten gold across the endless plains. Dust swirled in the cooling breeze, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the distant hum of saloon music from town. The world seemed hushed, as though it too had witnessed the blood and heartbreak that brought them here. Elias stood at the crest of a ridge, hat in hand, the day's battle etched into the lines of his face. Beside him, Clara rested against his arm, her veil gone, her hair unbound and glowing in the last light of day. Behind them lay the ashes of fear and shadow of man who would never haunt her again. Ahead stretched nothing but open sky and promise. For a long moment, neither spoke. They watched the stallion paw the earth, restless of the road. Then Clara's hand slipped into his, her fingers trembling, though not from fear. "I thought the past was lost," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "But you brought it back to me and gave me a future I never dared to dream." Elias turned to her, his voice rough with emotion. "Home ain't a cabin in the mountains or a ranch on the plains. Home is you, always was." She pressed her forehead to his chest, a tearful smile breaking through. Together they mounted the horse, riding toward the burning horizon, 2 silhouettes framed against the dying sun, no longer running, but free at last. And as the coyotes sang and night claimed the sky, their love carried them forward, fierce as the west itself.